For more, let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer. He's a retired Marine Corps intelligence officer. Lieutenant Colonel Hal, good to have you with us. The summit, on again, off again, now maybe on again. President Trump walking away, that seems to have scared the North Koreans back to the table. Will this meeting happen, and what will it take for it to be back on?
Well, I think, Michelle, we're going to see a meeting happen. I don't know if it's going to happen on June 12th. As you pointed out, the security preparations are fairly extensive. You know, anytime the President of the United States goes anywhere overseas, there's tremendous prep work that has to happen. And then, of course, you have Kim Jong-un. He doesn't normally travel overseas. In fact, he, his father, his grandfather were somewhat notorious for not traveling overseas very much and being rather paranoid about their security precautions, often taking armored trains as opposed to flying anywhere. So there's a lot of preparation that goes into this. Singapore could be, but I would say probably later on. If we're going to see something around the 12th, my guess would be Panmunjom up there in the Peace Village would be logistically easier to pull off. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of preparations, and they want to make sure this thing has some measure of success.
Do you think that we could have a pre-summit summit, if you will, with some lower-level players happening on June 12th?
Well, I think that's very possible. I could see where we could bring in, I don't know if it has to be up to, say, the Secretary of State Pompeo level. It could be done below that. But I think you're going to have some substantive negotiation discussions prior to the actual summit. At this point, obviously, and literally you could take this out of Donald Trump's book, Art of the Deal, being willing to walk away or being basically say, okay, we'll just not take that. That's a negotiation strategy. We don't see it a lot with international negotiations, but in business, that's not uncommon. Right. So both sides are a little wary, and I think we certainly want to see that this is going to have some measure of success so we can walk away and say this was a worthwhile summit.
Hal, President Trump has been pointing the finger at China, alluding that it was Beijing that derailed the summit and brought up a change in attitude that we saw from Kim Jong-un subsequent to his second surprise meeting with China, seeming to allude that this was a President Xi tactic. What is China's role in derailing this meeting and then in getting it back on?
I think that China's role is really, I think they would see themselves as kind of the puppeteers, if you will. They have a very close relationship with North Korea. They're their primary sponsor, if you will. North Korea, as a society, as a nation state, probably couldn't function if it wasn't for the generosity of China keeping them afloat. So they have a tremendous amount of control. And when they look at North Korea, it's within context of the entire region. And we can't ignore all the things happening in the South China Sea. There's a lot of things going on. Earlier this week, we disinvited China from participating in the huge multinational RIMPAC exercise. That's a major move on our part. It also is a major reflection of just how tense the security situation is in the South China Sea and the entire region. So it has to be looked at in a larger context.
Hal, meantime, Pyongyang made a big show of destroying the Punggye-ri nuclear testing site. Now, China have said that this was actually an empty concession because it probably wasn't operational anyway. And there are reports of Chagang province now becoming a new location for nuclear weapons and related facilities. What do you know about this? What do you make of all of this?
Well, Chagang province has always been what they call a strategic reserve going back to the Korean War. It's a fairly mountainous, rugged area. There's a lot of vegetation. If you want to hide things from overhead observation or you want to put some barriers, physical barriers between you and who would ever go in there, that's the province they've traditionally used. It makes it very difficult for any inspection regime to be adhered to because it would be all new. Hence, there'd have to be an intelligence buildup. The problem with inspections is the inspectors can ask to inspect some place, but they can't ask to inspect a place that they don't know about. So they have to know that these places exist. Now, as far as the destruction of the current testing facility, it looked impressive, but they didn't let any certified experts or inspectors come in. I had when I was watching the buildings blowing up, and then when I was watching the mouths of the tunnels or the openings of the tunnels blowing up, I kind of looked at that and I said, is this more of a cosmetic thing? Because it really had almost a feeling of a movie set where it looked like destruction, but there was no way to verify that there was destruction. And then it was very suspicious that they seized the radiation detectors from the journalists going in there. I thought that was rather odd.
Rather odd indeed, added to a long list of odd developments in the situation. Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, stick around. We want to get your take on Iran and its nuclear ambitions as well. And the Iranians, meanwhile, are putting pressure on America's European allies. Iran is giving European leaders until the end of the month to come up with an economic relief package that would persuade Iran to stay in the deal. The remaining partners in the 2015 agreement include China and Russia, and they met in Vienna on Friday for the first time since the U.S. pulled out of the deal earlier this month. All right, for more, let's bring in our senior diplomatic correspondent, Nina Larson, joining us at the United Nations. So, Nina, what exactly is Iran asking for here?
Well, Iran's main concern, Michelle, is quite understandably their economy. Their economy is already faltering. And what they're seeking from the EU and these other parties that still want to remain in the deal is some kind of reassurance. And as you said, it's a very tight deadline for this. It's the end of next week. Some kind of reassurance that foreign companies that are going to invest in Iran or have already invested in Iran aren't going to be subject to sanctions and secondary sanctions by the United States. Obviously, this is very, very complex. And there's a lot of very big, particularly European firms who are very, very hesitant to get further involved with Iran. For example, the big French oil company, Total. So a very, very difficult list of demands for the EU. But I have to say, the fact that this meeting has happened at such a senior level and so quickly, just after Foreign Minister Zarif was doing a whistle-stop diplomatic tour of those capitals last week, it just shows you how all the signatories of the Iran deal are very, very concerned about this and how everyone is trying to resolve this diplomatically as soon as possible. Those sanctions that the US has reimposed have not bitten yet. They haven't been quite imposed. There's a kind of grace period. They will start to affect the Iranian economy in August and November. So, you know, Iran's really racing against the clock here.
All right, Nina, thank you so much. Nina Larson live at the UN for us. Well, let's bring back Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer. Hal, Iranians, as Nina just told us, coming to the Europeans and the other parties to this deal with a list of demands for Iran to stay in this deal. One of those demands that Europe needs to make up for any damage caused to it by U.S. sanctions. And they also want the other parties to promise to not take action against its ballistic missile programs. And this, of course, as a new facility has been discovered. Does Iran really have the leverage to make all of these demands here? Could this backfire on Iran?
Michelle, I think it could backfire. The demands are certainly what we would expect them to have asked for when the decision was made, going back originally. But the reality is, it's leverage. You know, for example, they were going to buy Boeing aircraft. Well, then they said we're going to switch over and buy Airbus when we decide to pull out of the agreement. Well, Airbus has a lot of business with the United States, and this is not a simple negotiation. These guarantees for these corporations that if they do business with Iran with the sanctions reimposed, that they might have some sort of sanction imposed on them. It's difficult if you're sitting in the CEO seat to decide if you want to do that. The risk is incredibly high. The liability is high. And Iran is looking at not just the direct impact from what the U.S. has done, but the indirect impact from across the board. And then we have to remember, even if Russia was to step in and say, well, we'll do more business with you, Russia does not have a lot of economic clout. So I think the fear in Iran is that this thing falls apart. And even if they try to reimpose or try to reinstate their nuclear weapons program, that the economic tsunami that would hit them might cause, you know, something along the lines of the Arab Spring to pop up in Iran again.
And that could potentially even be the strategy here to get the economic hardship to spark an unrest, a revolt, if you will. Do you think that that's what the U.S. is hoping for?
Well, I don't know that that's our strategy outright. I'm sure that anybody looking at this and analyzing it, certainly in the Pentagon with the Joint Planning Group, I'm sure that's been brought up many times that this could trigger something like that. But this puts phenomenal pressure on the Iranians, and it's really looking at the long game, which is what do we want the Iranians to do? Well, we want them to quit basically doing things like Hezbollah and putting in bases in Syria. We don't want them doing what they're doing in Yemen with the Houthis. We want them to pull back. And then we want some sort of constraints on their expanding ballistic missile program. That's the big concern. The ballistic missile program has even larger concerns because if Iran is testing ballistic missiles, particularly with intercontinental capability and the ability to re-enter and hit a target at those distances, well, that's technology that could get transferred very quickly over to North Korea. So it's not just a Middle Eastern issue that we're looking at here. It's possible global issues in terms of what could happen. And that's part of the whole what-if thing when you go into this sort of planning process.
Yeah, many areas of concern, including, like we said, that secret ballistic missile facility that's just been discovered. Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, thank you so much. Appreciate your analysis, as always.
Thank you, Michelle.